Good afternoon, everyone. We'll be starting shortly in about 5 minutes. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to start by thanking all of you for joining us today at this Election 2020 forum and take a moment to wish all of you good health. I know this is a very stressful time and that the elections are not until June and November. but it's necessary to start to think about the elections and the issues. So let me begin by naming the groups that are sponsoring today's forum, and then I will introduce the speakers. By the way, after each speaker, you will be able to ask questions. You just have to use your chat button. Okay. All right, so now the speakers are Peace Action of Staten Island, Staten Island Women Who March, the NAACP, the Staten Island branch, Move Forward Staten Island, Staten Island for Change, Communication Workers of America, Local 1102, Swing Left, the Social Justice Committee of the Unitarian Church of Staten Island, Metro New York Healthcare for All, and the Staten Island Political Action Club. One note, in addition, we're honored to have Ed Josie, president of the Staten Island NAACP branch, with us today. First, New York City Commissioner and Executive Director of the Board of Elections, Michael Ryan, and Director of Communications, Valerie Diaz, will give an update on the Board of Elections procedures, especially for absentee ballots for the June 23rd election in New York. They will be followed by Roxanne Mustafa from Staten Island Women Who March, who will ask the commissioner your questions as well as some of her own, and then she will provide us some additional invaluable information regarding the upcoming elections. As Roxanne is a user research, product designer, and technology consultant, she has leveraged her skills in research, facilitation, problem solving, data analysis, and design to help build her community and raise the voice of women and other groups on Staten Island. She is the co-founder and co-director of Staten Island Women Who March. The goal of this organization is to utilize and build a network of women to improve the quality of life in our borough. After Roxanne finishes, Nidhi Khanna from Peace Action of Staten Island will speak on environmental issues. Mark Hannay from Metro New York Healthcare for All will speak on healthcare issues. And Sam Kokoza from CWA Local 1102 will speak on labor issues. Bear with me for a moment while I tell you a little bit about the speakers, and then I will be turning it over to Commissioner Ryan. Nidhi started working in politics in 2008 as an organizer for former President Obama's presidential campaign. She is on the executive boards of South Asians for America, which is a national grassroots organization that works to elect South Asian candidates up and down the ballot across the country. She's also on the board of Peace Action of Staten Island. When she has time, among her other activities, she's also an active member of Sustainable Staten Island and a mentor for former Vice President Al Gore's not-for-profit education and advocacy organization, the Climate Reality Project. Mark is the director of Metro New York Healthcare for All, a citywide coalition of community groups and labor unions founded in 1993 that advocates for fundamental healthcare reform leading to a universal healthcare program. He co-chairs the steering committee of Healthcare for All New York. He chairs the board of the National Universal Healthcare Action Network, and he coordinates the New York City Organizing Committee of Healthcare for America Now. Finally, Sam has been a member of the Communication Workers of America Local 1102 since 1996, as well as having been a shop steward. Currently, he is the vice president of Local 1102, which is comprised of more than 500 workers from Conduent and Verizon. To state the obvious, he is an extremely experienced labor leader. And now I would like to turn everything over to Commissioner Ryan.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
I can.
Okay, good. So I want to thank the organizers and the sponsors for putting this forum together. We're going to need more of these moving forward as things continue to evolve. And I would also like to recognize the brothers and sisters of those in Local 1102. Our union is CWA Local 1183. So we have some of our own election heroes working for us every day, coming in as we're deemed essential services, and we still have our offices open to do the work necessary, albeit at a significantly reduced number of staff reporting in. So they're really doing yeoman's work. I want to just calm the waters a little bit with respect to the absentee balloting process. And the reason I say that is we're getting a lot of inquiries regarding the governor's recent executive order. And it's important, and we're working on it, and we're working to interpret it along with the State Board of Elections. The reason I'm saying I want to calm the waters a little bit is, while it's important to get the applications in, the ballots have not been finalized yet. The hearing process to finalize the ballots for the City of New York will commence on April the 21st, and there are numerous contests and party positions up for election in this primary election scheduled for June 23rd. So those hearings will be conducted on the 21st, 22nd, and 23rd of this coming week. And then we have to wait a little bit for the court challenge process to complete. Also, the State Board of Elections will be meeting, at least the Democratic commissioners, the State Board of Elections, will be meeting on April the 27th to determine what is going to happen, if anything, with the presidential primary, which is also scheduled. Now, I give that all as a backdrop because until the ballots are finalized, we cannot begin the preparation process electronically in our system. And the reason that ties directly to the absentee balloting process is, even if we receive requests for absentee ballots, until we have a finalized ballot, we cannot begin to mail those out. So we still have a good couple of weeks before anybody would be expecting to receive a ballot. We're not going to build them in the system. Probably that process will be completed right around May 4th, which means they wouldn't be available for distribution until later that week. So we do have a little bit of time to get our ducks in a row. Now, before we get to the new process, I would like to remind everyone that you can still apply for an absentee ballot the regular way. On our website, we have a fillable PDF that can be, for people that have access to a computer, they can go on our website, fill out a request for an absentee ballot pursuant to Governor's Executive Order 202.15. A signature is not required for all elections up to and including those conducted on June the 23rd. But if you submit an absentee ballot request the old-fashioned way, we will still process that. So for those that have access to a computer, you can go onto your computer, go to vote.nyc, click on the absentee ballot button, it'll bring you to that absentee ballot application. You could fill out the PDF, you could sign it, you could send it back to us, and it will be processed the same way that we process them for any election. So even though there is a new process that is in the offing, the old process is still in place and can be utilized for people that want to take advantage of that. Now, we move forward to the governor's executive order, and the governor's executive order stands for the proposition that the Board of Elections throughout the state can receive and process absentee ballot applications without the necessity of a signature on the absentee ballot application form. And there are various ways that can be done, certainly by email, but you have to include sufficient information, this is the way the language reads, sufficient information that such that we can identify the voter and then process it and mail out the absentee ballot to that voter. Now, we have some open questions with the State Board of Elections, and they're going to resolve them with the governor. For example, can you only apply for an absentee ballot via an individual email? In other words, an email that comes from the voter, or can there be a single email with multiple names and dates of birth and addresses on it that we would have to process? I don't have an answer to that question just yet because we have to follow the direction of the State Board of Elections. But suffice to say that the governor's office and the State Board of Elections is working together, and I presume that they will be conferring with the state legislature as well to make a determination exactly what the process is that needs to be followed. We do have some changes that we're making to the website that should be finalized over the weekend, and there will be next week available a portal that voters will be able to access to make an absentee ballot application and submit it to us electronically. We're going to drive as many voters to that portal as we can while still offering other options, because what you would do is go on to our website, click the button. It would bring you to a screen that would have you enter your name, first and last name, date of birth, county, and zip code. Once you enter that information, if you're matched with a voter, it will redirect you to the portion of the website that would allow for you to complete the absentee ballot application process. That will be beneficial to the voter for those that have access, and it will be optimized for mobile use as well. So you'd be able to do it from your cellular phone or a tablet device, whether it's an iPad or other. And that will hopefully be convenient for many voters. And for the voters that don't have that access, we'll have a separate process. Now, from our end, the reason we're going to direct people there is internally, those applications will be dropped into an electronic queue for each borough office to process. So we'll receive those in a queue. Everything will be date and time stamped and then married to individual voter records so that when we complete the process, it will be much more streamlined. And our concern is twofold. One, that there will be an uptick in applications for this June, and we'd like to process those as streamlined as possible and reduce the amount of data entry that we have to do on our end. And the other is we wanted to establish a process that could be tested in a in a time where we would have less volume, so that if a similar process is directed by the governor to remain in place for the general election in November, we will already have experience with doing it this way. Now, I don't want to give the impression that that is an experimental process, because we are mirroring the process that we use presently to process electronic voter registration applications. So what we just did was we took the voter registration process that we have in place and replicated it for the absentee ballot application process. And that will be a much more efficient way for us than simply having emails coming in from voters all throughout the city. Now, we will also have a process in place for the emails, if that's the method that the voters choose. And we're working with the State Board of Elections to determine how we handle phone requests. We don't have a specific direction on that, but once we do, we'll incorporate that into our processes as well. That's I think, captures the update that I have with respect to the absentee ballot process, and I'm certainly willing to answer any questions regarding that, or if there's another topic or topics that the group has concern about or would like me to address, I'm happy to do that as well.
Commissioner Ryan, hi, this is Roxanne Mustafa. Wow, thank you so much for sharing that information. It sounds like the BOE is very busy trying to catch up to the governor's executive order. We have a bunch of questions. Let's see if we could do our best to answer as many as we can, as briefly and succinctly as we can.
Well, briefly and succinctly is a challenge for me, but I'll try.
We'll do our best. I think you just did a great job of giving us the whole rundown. So just to start, can you just clarify and summarize again the old-fashioned process versus the new for the absentee ballot request form, the application form? What I heard you describe was old-fashioned being, mailing in the form, printing it and mailing it traditionally. I heard you also, and then another old-fashioned form is, of course, we're still able to come to the BOE to drop off the form.
Yes.
And then I also heard that you're opening up email. So there is an ability to send it via email. In addition, I think you also mentioned a portal that you're trying to open up so that can be funneling voters through a queue. Can you please confirm those?
Certainly. So yes, a hard paper application signed and mailed in will be processed. A hard paper application signed and brought to the offices will be processed. If someone wants to avail themselves of that process, they can go onto our website and utilize the fillable PDF. Now, for some voters, I want to stress, they may still want to use the process that's already in place, because the current executive order only applies to elections for right now up to and including June the 23rd. So, for example, if somebody was going to move overseas and become an expatriate and still be eligible to vote, they might want to use the regular form, because they will sign that and it will cover a longer period of time, whether it be a permanent absentee or a temporary absentee that would last, for a year. So if you have visions beyond June 23rd, you still want to use the process with the signature, because the executive order only extends to June the 23rd. If you're just concerned about the 23rd, the processes that you've laid out are available. We will be having an email, and all of this is going to be up on our website. I believe some of the information was posted late yesterday, but it should all be done by Monday. We're going to have an email address, and don't quote me on it, but it's going to be something like absentee June 2020 @boe.nyc. So we'll have a dedicated email where if you want to avail yourself of the email process, you can do that. Our instructions will be laid out, given all of the available options, but we are going to want to drive people as the board to the portal that's going to be established, because it'll streamline our work and it will make it easier for the voter.
Got it.
And especially while we're operating with reduced staff on a rotating basis, the less busy work, quote unquote, that we could give our workers and make that process easier, it'll help us and it'll help us serve the voters, because those things will be turned around more quickly if we can avoid unnecessary or duplicative data entry.
Got it. And do you have an idea of when the portal might be up? I understand the ballot is still being formed.
As exciting as it sounds, I have been able to access a hyperlink from my desk and test it. So there's some additional language changes that our techies were incorporating over the weekend, so that we looked at it. We try to take stock of where it was deficient in terms of instructions, and we also wanted to make sure that whatever we did complied with existing election law and election law as modified by the instructions of the Executive Order 202.15. We had given instructions to the tech folks to have it ready for 9 a.m. Monday morning. Given some of the changes, I don't know if we're going to hit the 9 a.m. deadline, but I'm anticipating that we will be live with that sometime during the day on Monday. And then Ms. Vasquez and the rest of the staff will formulate a press release, which will then go out, on traditional forums and also social media forums, as well as our website.
This is great. All right. So it sounds like you're all working around the clock. We have some questions about the logistical form. Number one, I heard you say that the signature is not required for the request. And I would
Correct.
like you to confirm. Okay. So that's confirmation. So now for the folks that filled out an absentee.
But Roxanne, if I could just say, however,
sure.
If the voter wants that application to apply to any elections beyond June the 23rd, given the current executive order, the signature is still required.
I follow you. So in the form, and I'm going to show the form in a little bit, there's a section for those that don't know where you say, I request an absentee ballot for the following time period. And what Commissioner Ryan is saying is if you're requesting an absentee ballot for beyond June 23rd, then a signature is required.
Correct.
Great. Also, a lot of questions about that first question on the box. I did notice in the executive order specifically, it said to list that you are unable to be in person at the polling precinct because of health concerns. Number one, do you need to fill out that first question for the June 23rd primary? And number two, if you left it blank, does your request become invalid?
According to the guidance that we received from the State Board of Elections, that first box must be filled out. Because you have to give a reason. Now, the signature requirement has been waived for all reasons, for all elections up to and including June 23rd. However, if your reason is fear of spread of COVID-19, or I have COVID-19, or I've been exposed to COVID-19, any of those things that are related to COVID-19, what our website will tell you is that the definition of temporary illness has been expanded for this time period to include things related to COVID-19 in a general and expansive way. So there is no justification police, if you will. If you check that box, we will take your word for it. And we'll process it accordingly.
Well, I definitely recommend for those that may have not filled out the box or filled it out incorrectly to maybe use the portal, which hopefully will be up and running next week. Okay, another question about we know that everyone's operating on a skeleton crew, and I'm sure the BOE isn't, you know, isn't the same as everyone else. And
Right. So can I just tell you, we have 900 employees. Actually, unfortunately, 3 of our employees have passed away from COVID, and 1 probably. So we started this process with 903 full-time employees, and we have 899. We have been operating up to this point, having worked closely with the union to establish a work-from-home footing for those folks that can, and then a working rotation. We have 74 employees between management and union reporting to our work locations across the 5 boroughs, down from 900. So yes, we are operating with a very, very skeleton crew, but we're doing what we can to continue to fulfill our statutory mandates to get the process completed for the voters.
Many folks are concerned about applications slipping through the cracks, and maybe, like we said, filling out. Like, how can we ensure? And also, in addition, the post office, right? Those who decide to mail, is the post office running at full capacity? What can the BOE say to ensure that every absentee ballot request form will be received, and that every absentee ballot will be mailed out, and the most important part, every absentee ballot will be counted?
Yes. So the last part is the easy one. Every absentee ballot is counted. It is an urban legend that we only count absentee ballots if they're going to impact a contest. That is absolutely not true. New York State has one of the most comprehensive post-election canvass processes to make sure that all votes that are cast are properly tabulated. Now, they also extended the time at the back end last year in the legislature from 7 days to 10 days to allow for receipt of the absentee ballots after Election Day, having nothing to do with what's going on now, but just an acknowledgement. And it was really particularly with respect to overseas voters and military voters, to give them a little bit more time so that they would not be disenfranchised by a deadline. With respect to the post office, I suspect that the post office is operating at reduced capacity, and we have no control over that. However, in terms of the receipt of the absentee ballot applications, that is another reason why we want to drive people to this portal once it's fully up and running, and we hope that to be on Monday, because then we don't have the concerns of whether or not we're receiving the application through the mail. We'll get it, and it will be date and time stamped in a queue, and so that when the staff comes in the morning, whatever came in, from the day before or on the overnight, will be sitting in a queue waiting for them. So we'll take the mailing delay out of the front end. We'll take away the uncertainty of delivery on the front end. We'll also reduce the risk to our staff, since we really haven't been given perfect answers with respect to whether the virus is spread through paper contact, right? And so if somebody licks an envelope and sends it in, does that put my staff at risk? So that's why we really want to try to drive everyone to the electronic process. And we know this process works because we've already been doing it for at least 4 years with respect to voter registration forms.
Ah, great. That's
so we just took what was already in place and modified what the person sees on the screen.
Yes.
So the process isn't really changed. It's just changing for the voter, but not for us.
So for those folks that may have filled out an absentee ballot request form in the past, do you recommend that they go to the portal and resubmit to help the BOE process these?
They certainly can, but if you have a valid absentee application in place that is good, like, first of all, if been a permanent absentee voter, there's absolutely nothing for you to do. So, you know, there are folks that have difficulty getting around. Certainly, our nursing home voters, but there are people that fall into the category of permanent absentee. Once you fill that out, you're a permanent absentee for us. The only thing that we would need to know is if you're no longer at the address where you were.
Yeah.
So if nothing's changed for you and you're a permanent absentee, you don't have to do anything. If you're an overseas voter, and we know that, you don't have to do anything. Military, you've already told us, don't do anything. Anybody that's put in for a temporary absentee ballot for a period that extends beyond June 23rd, don't do anything. We only need to hear from the people that are new to the process, either in any of the existing categories that would require a signature, or in this new category of COVID-19 that don't require a signature. So we're only looking to hear from new people to the process.
Got it.
The folks that are already in the process, there's nothing for them to do, and we'll process those the way that we do every election.
Commissioner, there are two very really good questions that came in through the QA chat that I really want to try to ask you, and I'm going to cut in my time so that you can answer them, but we do need to do it as briefly as we can, but I'm going to give you a heads up that they're pretty tough questions. So the first question is, given the current pandemic, will hearings be held virtually? How will this process work for candidates whose signatures are being challenged?
So yes, the hearings are being held virtually, although given the rules, we cannot preclude people from appearing in person if they wish. But we will have established on our website the hearings for Staten Island, Manhattan, and the Bronx will be on Monday. Brooklyn will be on Tuesday. Brooklyn will be on Wednesday, and Queens will be on Thursday. So there will be a WebEx that's established, and people who need to appear can appear by WebEx. I will be quarterbacking the meeting to make sure that everybody gets their opportunities. The borough offices will prepare the petitions as they always do, except that they will remain in their borough offices. And if documents need to be reviewed, petition documents need to be reviewed by the commissioners, that will be done electronically by camera. The other documents, the clerk's reports and the supporting documents for the clerk's reports, will all be disseminated to the commissioners on a rolling basis. So the county documents that are needed for Tuesday will be sent to the commissioners on Monday. And then the Wednesday documents will be sent on Tuesday, and the Thursday documents will be sent on Wednesday. So the commissioners will be appearing remotely as well, and they'll have all of the documents that they need, except the petition documents. However, the petition documents will be able to be presented before a digital camera for review and inspection by all of the participants.
Great, great. Okay, final question. In 2016, 200,000 voters were purged and could not vote in the primaries. Why did this happen? What has been done to make sure it doesn't happen again? All
right, so that was an incident that primarily occurred in Brooklyn. The backdrop to that was, and this is always an example, this is a prime example of an attempted overcorrection. The Board of Elections had been criticized in a Department of Investigation report for not taking voters off the voter rolls. And matter of fact, it was our assessment that the Department of Investigation, in fact, broke the law during their investigation when they sent DOI investigators into poll sites to cast votes in the names of other individuals. The then borough chief and deputy in Brooklyn responded to that and took a look at their voter rolls and folks that hadn't voted for quite some time. What I want to tell everybody, yes, it happened. Yes, the numbers were stark. However, all of the voters that were removed from the voter rolls in the lead up to the April 2016 presidential primary election were in fact restored to the voter rolls by the first week of June 2016. So this issue has really been, for our purposes, a dead issue since then. As you would imagine, it led to, and so that was one piece of it. The other piece of it was we scoured those affidavit ballots, and anyone who was on that list of individuals that was removed from the voter rolls that in fact cast a vote by affidavit in that presidential primary, their vote was counted. So we solved that problem the best that we could immediately. Now, as you could imagine, we were then sued over that issue. And we entered into a settlement with the Department of Justice, the New York State Attorney General's Office, Common Cause, and other groups. And we had to submit, and we did submit to the court a comprehensive remedial plan to make certain that the voter rolls are maintained as strictly as we can. That involves us sending monthly statistical data to the Department of Justice, to the Attorney General's Office, and to the private plaintiffs in this case for external review on a monthly basis to make certain that, that they're holding our feet to the flame, that we are doing things the way that we're supposed to be doing. And I would hope that the knowledge of that increases the confidence. Now, the other piece of the puzzle that really is important, and it's hard to describe how essential it is, but we established electronic category, electronic queues with enhanced categories of how documents are processed, so that we went away from the old manual process, and we're using the technology that we have to assist us in our internal auditing process, because each voter registration form has to be processed individually. So it makes mass audit very difficult, because I have to know that I processed Roxanne Mustafa's voter registration properly. I can't say Roxanne Mustafa submitted it on, April the 16th and just do a mass audit of everybody that submitted on April the 16th. The other thing was, there was an over-reliance on electronic communication between the city board and the state board of elections, and we enhanced the audit process from a quarterly audit process to it's basically done nightly, at least 5 times a week. And we've been able to reduce our discrepancies between the city board and the state board on, we put out 4.6 million active voters and 600,000 inactive. So about 5.3 million records are being exchanged on a daily basis. And we have our discrepancies down to single digits.
All right. Wow, Commissioner Ryan, this has been so informative at such a critical time. We couldn't have planned it better with you coming in and informing us what's happening. I'm so appreciative of all the things that are changing very quickly to accommodate all the voters. There's a few more questions, but I was wondering if we could ask those of you offline and find a way to answer them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Val will get back to you with her email. If you could funnel it to Valerie, and we'll take care of it that way. And the other thing is, I know everybody's interested in this, so just let me close on this.
Sure.
The State Board of Elections, the Democratic commissioners are meeting on April the 27th to determine what's going to happen with the presidential primary. So that is something that everybody wants to take a look at, because that will change what happens on Staten Island in particular dramatically, depending on which way they go. If they decide to cancel the presidential primary, then we will only be left with a Republican primary for the congressional as an island-wide. And then I believe Senator Savino has a challenger. I don't mean to give short shrift to the challenger. I just don't remember the name off the top of my head, which would be on the North Shore of Staten Island. So that primary would still happen, depending on what happens with the hearings this week. If all of those candidates survive the hearings, then those primaries will move forward.
Got it. Quick question, Commissioner Ryan, is this the first time we had a presidential primary and a local primary on the same day, on the same ballot, in theory?
Well, it's the first one that I'm aware of, because usually the presidential primaries happen in April.
Separately. Mm-hmm.
But there have been special elections that have been married up with the presidential primary. So it's not completely out of the realm, but it's certainly different. But then again, a lot of things are different these days.
A lot of things are going to be different. Thank you again so much. I'm sorry to cut you off so quickly.
Nope.
This was really great. We really value your time, and we appreciate.
Thank you, and I know you have
questions.
other important issues to get to as well. So thank you.
All right. All right.
I would like to thank both of you. This was really extremely informative and kind of overwhelming.
Yes. It does affect, so this is now.
So can I ask one question?
Sure.
Does that dispel the myth that the Board of Elections only works one day a year?
Absolutely. But I'm not sure that there isn't a new myth now that you never stop working.
Well, I don't want to exaggerate it one way or the other.
All right. Well, I want to thank you both again. And Nidhi, can we turn it over to you now?
Okay, I'll sign off then. Thanks.
Sure. Barbara, I did want to go through just some really critical things that changed, if that's okay. I think I could take 5 minutes to go through. Yes.
Go right ahead.
So this is now my introduction of the important things that you need to know. And so much has changed based on what the commissioner told us, which is really great. I am going to try to go through all 4 sections here, but I think I'm only going to be limited to some. But I want to talk about the important election dates and what's changed. We'll summarize what Commissioner Ryan said. I'll briefly go through voter turnout, barriers to voting, and what you can do. And I have a feeling we might skip through some of these sections, so bear with us. So yes, folks, a lot's changing. We're all trying to figure it out as we go. As you can see, many of our systems are also still trying to figure out what's happening as we go. I'm here to just summarize and to tell you what this means for the election. The only thing that's changed is that the presidential primary, in terms of dates, the only thing that's changed is that the presidential primary that was back in April has now moved to June. And as Commissioner Ryan said, there's going to be things that are going to affect what that ballot looks like on June 23rd. So the executive order asked for us to move the primary, but as of now, there's no other dates that have changed. What that means is all of the deadlines for June 23rd apply. So you can't change your party enrollment, that passed on February 14th, but you could still, if you're not registered to vote, you could still register by May 29th, postmarked by June 3rd, in time for the primaries. And when I say primary now, I mean local and presidential. Of course, depending on what the parties do for those races. There's also in-person registration if you so choose, and you could also still change your address by June 13th. Now, early voting, we didn't get a chance to ask the commissioner how this might change because we're not optimizing for the polling sites, but that is a question we're going to follow up on. And again, as the commissioner said, this is an executive order, and it specifically asks that you check off temporary illness or physical disability. And this is what the form looks like. It's that very first question. Many of us have talked about like keeping that blank or what is the most accurate thing. I think the commissioner just broke it down that it's the second checkbox on the left that now is a requirement. But of course, there isn't going to be the kind of scrutiny over these applications for absentee ballots. So the request for the application, there's a request for the ballot and then the actual ballot. We're going to talk about the application for the absentee ballot. And I know sometimes people say mail-in ballot. We don't have a mail-in process here in New York. So what we call it is an absentee ballot. And that's what, when we say absentee ballot, that's what we mean. But of course it does mean a ballot that's mailed to you. We just don't have a mail-in ballot form. And there's multiple ways that you can access the application. It's available on the Board of Ed site, and you could also write a letter to the Board of Ed. I recommend that you take a snapshot of this page if this is important for you and relevant to you, because you can access the Board of Ed of Richmond County on the right here through all of these means. And in addition, what we learned today is that there may be a portal that's up and running Monday that has been designed to take on these absentee ballot application forms. when you get the absentee ballot, if you get it in paper form, the deadlines are by mail by June 16th, or you could still drop it off all the way up to the day before the election. In addition, you can email or fax, and the new method is now the portal, which will be up and running soon. We will all do our best to blast out on Facebook and on social media and everywhere we can what the application web portal is. But if you go to the Board of Ed site, the commissioner explained that a lot of things will be up on that splash page. Now, when you get your absentee ballot, AKA the mail-in ballot, we believe that the rules still apply. I think that the commissioner basically confirmed this. You can still drop it off in person the day of. You can postmark it within 7 days of the election. And so the time that it takes for them to get you the mail-in ballot form, and that's still being drafted and configured right now based on what the commissioner said, you then have the ability to fill it out and then drop it in the mail or drop it off in person. So those rules are still the same. And to reiterate this, this is the new process, the date change and the absentee ballot request for only the June 23rd primary. The executive order states all elections prior and up to June 23rd. So everything as of this date having to do with the general election is still the same. So if your absentee ballot form that you're filling out now says, I want an absentee ballot for June 23rd election and November 3rd election, then you need to make sure you sign it as per the rules before the pandemic. But if you only ask for the June 23rd ballot, then you don't have to sign it. So that's the one critical piece that you may want to be aware of that I just learned today. And all of the deadlines for the general elections still are the same. If you have not registered to vote after the local primaries and the presidential primary, and you still want to register to vote, you have up until October 9th, postmarked by October 9th and received by October 14th to register for the general election. So that's really important. And right now, nothing's really changed. They're still operating on the assumption that we'll have polling precincts and early voting. But that's not to say that you can't be proactive and ask for an absentee ballot in advance. Okay, I am not going to go through the rest of my slides because of time, but I did want to stay on this one thing, that if you are concerned about your the voting process and how we might democratize voting, the registration process, the voting process, all these new conversations are happening about mail-in ballots, online ballots. How does New York move forward? I really recommend that you talk to 3 groups of people here on this slide. In addition, there's a 4th category. The 4th category that's not on the slide is definitely reach out to the Board of Elections, but really your representatives are the ones that you need to get their ear and to talk to them about what you think is the best process. That's your assembly people that represent you in the various districts, as well as your senators. So the assembly people are Assemblyman Charles Fall, Assemblyman Michael Riley, Assemblyman Michael Cusick, Assemblywoman Nicole Maliotakis, and Senator Diane Savino and Andrew Lanza. In addition, the Democratic and Republican Party chairs of the county committee are also people you can poke, as well as your district leader. And hopefully you know who your district leader is. I know this is another big kind of box, of Pandora box, but if you know who your district leader is, definitely reach out to them and tell them, this is what I think should happen. Okay, that's pretty much where I'm going to stop. And if there's any questions in the chat, I'm looking to see if there's any questions, and I don't really see any right now. I'm just gonna pause for 3 more seconds. Someone said, great liberal New York State is number 43 in percentage of eligible voters. I see that at my local polling place. Yes, this is an anonymous question about how our voter turnout is very low in New York. I agree with you. It is very low. It's we're about 47 in New York State. The country is trending at about 57%. And the states that get the highest turnouts are states like Wisconsin and Iowa. they're upwards of over 70% turnout rates. And this is definitely something we want to make sure that we improve in New York State. And that's one of the things I definitely urge you to speak to your representatives. And this is your local representatives. You can certainly contact Max Rose about these things. Really, Max Rose isn't the person to talk to, except if you want sort of national action on the pandemic with respect to with respect to voting. But in general, the Constitution tells us that the states are the ones responsible for our election laws. But so I really encourage you to speak to our local representatives. Okay, that's it for me, Barbara.
Okay, well, thank you. And that was also greatly informing. And I think we're all lucky to have you. Anyway, Nidhi, can we turn it over to you now?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Barbara. And thank you to all the organizers and folks that got involved to plan this panel. So I'm going to talk about environment and the 2020 elections. Second. Before I begin, just wanted to tell everybody a little bit about myself. I'm representing Peace Action of Staten Island. I've done previous work on environmental issues as a scientific researcher, specifically on Hurricane Sandy, and currently I do digital environmental work with the Sierra Club. I am not here representing the Sierra Club, but I'm just here as a member of Peace Action to talk about environment and the elections. So I just wanted to share that disclaimer. So what's really important this year, and as in most elections, is that we need your voice. For the past 3.5 years, we have seen, especially at a federal level, a lot of important environmental regulations have been rolled back. It's now more important than ever to raise your voice and to speak up. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how environmental policy will impact us just in general in the presidential election this year. So prior to the primary state elections that were happening earlier this year, the Yale Climate Institute, Yale Program on Climate and Policy, Climate Nexus, and George Mason University did several polls with voters about climate change and environmental issues. And unlike previous years, climate change and environmental issues are actually one of the top tier issues of importance to voters, right behind healthcare, jobs, economy, and immigration. And what people are finding is that younger individuals are very concerned about climate change, and more overwhelmingly 70% of Democrats believe that climate change is an important issue, one of the top tier issues when voting. Even 51% of moderate Republicans now believe that climate change is man-made, and 25% of conservatives also believe that climate change is man-made. In the graphic that I have on this slide, the groups that did these polls asked whether or not they thought bringing renewable jobs would be beneficial to their state. And overwhelmingly, most people agreed that increasing income resources to renewable jobs would not only create renewable energy, would increase jobs in their states, but would be a good investment for the future. So as many of you probably know, there's been a lot of rollbacks on federal policy in terms of environmental issues. This information was compiled by the New York Times from Harvard and Columbia Law Schools. And what they found that 95% of total rollbacks done by the Trump administration have either been completed or are in process. So the different rollbacks include rollbacks to air pollution and emissions, drilling, infrastructure and planning, and water pollution. And the Trump administration particularly has been focusing on rolling back a lot of Obama era policies, but even some policies that date back to the Clinton era as well. And what they've been doing, even though there's a laundry list of environmental issues that face these reversals, they're usually, with the help of Congress, targeting these policies because they believe they're burdensome to fossil fuel industries and businesses. and the New York Times found that most of these lists represents rules that were officially reversed or rolled back completely. And one policy researcher at NYU even said that the methodology that the Trump administration is using to roll back these policies includes first delaying a rule, and then finally making sure that rule is no longer there. By what happens is when you're rolling back a rule or making changes to policy, you need to submit public comments. They're completely overriding that, and due to them not following the standard legal procedures, many lower courts have been able to fight back and make sure these agencies reinstate these policies. But even though they've been many courts have been successful to take legal action, there's still been many rollbacks anyways. So here are just some rollbacks that the New York Times compiled. One of the major rollbacks that many people know about is the United States submitted an intent to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. This agreement cannot be finalized until the November 2020 election. So if Mr. Trump does get elected to a second term, we will be out of the Paris Agreement. Another rollback that has been completed was that Obama-era flood standards for federal infrastructure projects like roads and bridges has been revoked, and the standards required that the government to account for sea level rise and other climate change effects has been revoked as well. And for a place like Staten Island that was particularly hit hard by Sandy, this is not helpful. The Trump administration has also rescinded water pollution regulation on federal and Indian lands. People that are usually left out of many policies now are really being completely ignored. They've also loosened a Clinton-era rule designed to limit toxic emission standards from industry polluters. And this is a rule that's been here for decades. And now that we're trying to reverse that, it's gonna harm people's health and also just change the environment drastically. Another completed rule includes a canceled requirement for oil and gas companies to report emission standards. Methane is one of the greenhouse gases that has been contributing to climate change. And although many people focus on carbon dioxide, methane is even more toxic and harmful to climate change and will speed up the climate change at a higher level. So these rollbacks, even though many people may not notice they're happening, will have long-term effects in the future and will substantially increase climate change in this country and globally. So while we're undergoing a global pandemic, the Trump administration has powered through and moved forward on rolling back a lot of environmental policy. Some policy that has gone under the radar that they have done while this pandemic is going on is rolling back mercury and toxic air standards. In Chicago, there was a retired coal plant, the Crawford coal plant, that was completely retired in 2012. And despite the pleas from local residents, the polluters and the state government allowed the demolition of this coal plant. And this was particularly bad because it blanketed its entire neighborhood in Chicago with a plummet of dust. And these folks are already impacted by respiratory issues because they live near a coal plant. But despite the fact that these folks were pleading, it happened anyway, and many of these folks are people of color. So even though there's many things happening at a federal level, we still need to pay attention what's going on at the state level and local level, because despite, you could have politicians that are on your side, you still need to make sure people are held accountable. And another thing that the Trump administration did was they rolled back the vehicle efficiency standards that President Obama had implemented towards the end of his term. And this was completed right under the radar while this pandemic was taking place. The environmental policy impacts us in Staten Island in a very different way than many other places. We all know that Staten Island was impacted by Hurricane Sandy and devastated many of our communities. At the state level, Governor Cuomo had actually bought back a lot of homes for individuals that lived in those areas that were impacted and gave that land back to nature. So we need to implement policies that will mitigate climate change and will build our cities and towns more efficiently. We have the seawall that will be built, but a seawall will not protect us from the next Sandy. in 2006, when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, the levee broke because a 30-foot storm surge devastated that man-made levee. So a seawall can be helpful towards mitigation policy, but it's not a be-all solution. There is the Billion Oyster Project that is in the Hudson River right now. It's proved to be effective. Basically, we have an oyster community that is eating the toxic chemicals in the water and also helping make those waves less strong. So this will help with climate change, reducing climate change and the frequency of storm surge from storms like Hurricane Sandy. So lastly, I wanted to end with organizations that are working on elections and helping to elect environmental champions. Some organizations that work on political work for elections include the League of Conservation Voters and the Sierra Club. Both organizations usually release a list of individuals that on the federal, state, and local level that they have determined are climate champions and will advocate, and based on previous votes and what they've been saying, will advocate on environmental policies. So if folks want to get involved specifically with groups and other individuals and activists that really care about environmental issues, you have opportunities to phone bank locally and remotely with both these organizations. I know Sierra Club does do texting to local candidates across the country. And so if you want to do that for local candidates or anywhere else around the country, there's opportunities to do so. And lastly, I just want to remind folks, filling out the census is really important. You can do it online or over the phone. And if you fill out the census, this will help us, especially with natural disasters. The government gives aid for natural disasters like Hurricane Sandy and for things like other things like that based on when you fill out the census. So this is important and ties directly to environmental policy. So I just want to make sure everybody keeps that in mind. Thank you everyone for your time. If folks have questions, I think I may be able to answer one or two really quick.
Yes, Nidhi, we have one question that actually summarizes a few other questions that we had. So while the administration is using us being distracted by COVID to roll back more protections, are there orgs looking at the positive benefits of the pause that's recording positive impacts when humans, companies cut down usual harmful actions that we can use to push them forward?
Yeah, so that's actually a great question. Many geologists are looking at the seismic activity that is reduced because most countries and states are on lockdown. So seismic activity is usually is from volcanoes or even from motor vehicles, and any kind of seismic activity will impact the way the Earth's crust will move. So since there's a lower amount of seismic activity, geologists are able to see smaller earthquakes that we wouldn't be able to pick up. And then this will help us with future prediction and scientific work. Some of scientists are also looking at aerosol particulate matter that we usually can't see how that impacts cloud activity, but now because there's less pollution in the air, that's something they may be able to extrapolate that data and use that analysis for the future.
That's great. Yeah, so we're creating new benchmarks in this very unusual time. Last question. How can governments and can governments tackle climate change while we're in a global pandemic?
Yeah, so we can, especially with, you look at the current stimulus package, many lawmakers are raising alarm at the fact that many polluters and fossil fuel companies are getting corporate bailouts. So it's important that, regular people raise concern about it and lawmakers raise issue about it, because we can try to implement, even though there's many immediate needs that need attention, we can try to implement, instead of giving bailouts to corporate polluters and fossil fuel companies, invest in renewable energy. So that way many people did lose their jobs. There could be a potential to build those jobs and create jobs in the future and stimulate the economy that way.
Nidhi, thank you so much. This was really helpful in such a short amount of time.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to pass it back.
It was depressing, but very informative. Thank you for all the work you do. Okay, Mark, would you like to talk about healthcare now?
in 10 minutes or less.
Well, actually, we'll let you have 11 minutes.
Oh, well, good. Thank you. Just good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mark Hannay. I'm Director of Metro New York Healthcare for All. We're a citywide coalition of community groups and labor unions, been around over 25 years now, working for universal healthcare and on issues that we believe strategic toward that goal. Before I get started, I just want to wish everyone well on coping with the current pandemic that we're all in, and the economic and social ramifications of that we're all living with. And I hope your families are safe and sound. And for those of you who may have family or friends that are dealing directly with the illness or have dealt with it, hopefully come out pretty well the other side, or even may have lost friends and family to the pandemic, our condolences and so forth. This is a really stressful time for all of us, and I just want to kind of acknowledge that before I go forward. So talking about healthcare issues, because of the pandemic that we're in, which is a public health crisis, quite frankly. The way I've been thinking about the issues now vis-a-vis the coming elections was there was pre-COVID and now there's post-COVID. And there's certainly some carryover from one to the other, but I think as health advocates, we're in a very different world now than we were a month, 6 weeks ago. It's a crisis moment, but it's also an opportunity. And I think the challenge for all of us is like, how do we take advantage of that opportunity? I think in general, there is no way we're going to go back to the former normal. Even if we wanted to, we can't. And for many of us, given the fissures that have been broadly exposed now because of this pandemic, we don't want to go back. We want to go forward to, and we must go forward to a new and different world on many issues, and that includes healthcare. So that's how I'm thinking of it, and that's how a lot of us advocates are thinking and talking about that now. So is that sort of an overall framework? There is sort of defensive actions that we are still going to have to be focusing on. Nidhi just checked off a bunch of things that the administration and so forth has done in the environmental justice arena, but in healthcare, we are still going to have to be defending the programs that we have in place, be they the Affordable Care Act, Medicare, Medicaid, and so forth. We're going to have work to do on that, and the opponents of healthcare justice, have got a game plan that they've developed, and they're still trying to push that forward, and we're going to have to keep an eye on that going forward. We're also going to want to be continuing to work on some incremental reforms. Some of them will be quite immediate in character, and I'll talk about them in a minute in relation to the next COVID response bill that will be coming out of the Congress, hopefully within the next month or so. And then, of course, there's our long-term vision goal of universal health care for everybody. And I think if this pandemic has exposed nothing else in the healthcare arena, it is the fact that we absolutely must move forward on some sort of a universal healthcare program, be it Medicare for all, or steps toward Medicare for all, or building on the Affordable Care Act, or any and all of the above. They're not mutually exclusive in the eyes of many of us. It is absolutely imperative that we move ahead on that now. And that will be an issue obviously coming up going forward into the elections. I think for those of us who are looking at healthcare in the elections, I want to pick up on an idea that Nidhi just closed with. We start that process by making sure that we have a successful census. That's going to be our springboard into action around moving healthcare as a major issue in the election. We need to make sure that as many people as possible fill out the census. That's our foundation that we'll be building on. We helped lead with our project in the 11th Congressional District, which encompasses Staten Island, the Vote for Healthcare campaign in 2018. And we're going to be, reviving and doing that campaign again, both in the 11th congressional district as well as in some other districts around the city where there are now primary challenges, and there's an open seat in the South Bronx, and we're going to be wanting to make sure that the Vote for Healthcare project is active in those arenas. And that really, the key components of that project, it's not rocket science for many of us, but just to remind ourselves, that involves, again, we start with the census, then we move to voter registration, then we move to voter education. And that has a few components to it, like what is at stake in this election when it comes to healthcare. And I think given the current pandemic that they're in, a lot of those issues are quite obvious. So we have to make sure that people understand what they are. What are the candidates' records on those issues? What are their positions that they're stating going into the election? And what do their records and positions mean in terms of the future of healthcare in our nation and our state and so forth? Because we are having elections not just at the national level for president and Congress, but we're having elections here in New York for the state legislature, and that will determine how we can move forward at a state level on key healthcare issues also. So it's not just the top tier issues where voters vote. And then the third component of that is we've got voter registration, voter education, and then the last component is voter mobilization and getting out the vote, getting people to the polls to vote. That will be critically important this year, and it may turn out to be quite a challenge depending on how the pandemic continues to play out. Hopefully it will be less of a challenge than more of a challenge, but that's kind of an unknown there. And when we look at voter mobilization and so forth, as Nidhi alluded to in her remarks, healthcare continues to be yet again and still a top tier issue for voters. And all indications are that it's going to be one. It's a top motivating issue for people to go to the polls because it is a very personal issue, and it's particularly personal now amidst the pandemic. And the third thing that we know about healthcare is an issue for voters is it's a very strong wedge issue. It really helps voters determine whether they're going to vote one way for one set of candidates or another way for another set of candidates. And I can't get into all those particulars because my own organization is not one that endorses and suggests that people vote for one candidate over the other. Some of the other organizations involved in both this webinar and in other aspects of the campaign can and do that, active candidate endorsement and so forth, and they can talk about that. But I just want to flag that healthcare is a top wedge issue. So if you're looking to motivate voters to vote one way versus another way, please bear that in mind. It's very much a very powerful issue in that regard. So with all that noted, let me quickly talk about the substance of the policy issues briefly, and then we can take a few questions. And again, I'm going to be really building off of sort of the pandemic moment that we find ourselves in currently, and is likely to be continuing for several weeks ahead, if not months ahead. And hopefully that will be, less, shorter rather than longer, but we don't know that yet. So I think for the priorities moving forward, given the current pandemic, is that there's a whole bunch of stuff around making sure that people have coverage in place going forward. Millions have lost their jobs and are losing their jobs, and that means they often lose their health care when they lose their employment. So we need to make sure that they get new coverage in place. And fortunately here in New York, we have a fairly robust Medicaid program, a basic health plan for those who are slightly above Medicaid eligibility levels but are low or no income. We have a strong Affordable Care Act marketplace that has affordable options available with financial assistance available to people. And we have a robust consumer assistance program that can help people make that transition. So that is one thing that we really need to be focusing on, is making sure that people get and stay in coverage going forward. We need to protect those coverage programs going forward. Fortunately, the Congress has responded to provide additional Medicaid funding to states, and that's a good thing because a lot of people are going to fall into the Medicaid program until they get new sources of employment that would have coverage associated with it. Medicaid is a safety net program that's meant to be there when economic downturns and natural disasters and so forth happen. Congress has recognized that. However, in addition to providing money to the states, they have put a requirement in place to states that if you're going to take the new additional money, and New York so far has, that you must maintain your existing robust Medicaid programs. You cannot take the federal money and turn around then and cut the program. And unfortunately, the Cuomo administration has been committed to a policy for the last month or so where they want to both take the money and let the federal government let them cut the program. So far, the federal government has remained strong, particularly Congress, but the Cuomo administration is very aggressive on this with Senator Schumer and our House delegation, and we need to make sure that our two senators and our House delegation, in this case, Representative Rose, stand strong on Medicaid and maintain what's called the maintenance of effort provision so that we don't see any rollbacks in our Medicaid program here in New York. Then other just broad areas that these bills may be dealing with going forward will be issues around what happens to treatments that are developed and a vaccine that gets developed and so forth, which is all very important. And we have to make sure that there's no pharmaceutical industry profiteering with that, that it's broadly available and affordable to everybody so that we can get past this pandemic crisis. And in terms of a vaccine, you know, they've been saying it's going to take a year to a year and a half or more to get to that point. So it's really important once we get there that everybody has access to it. A third thing, obviously, we need a much more robust public health infrastructure in place. Fortunately, here in New York, we've long had one. You know, New York is looked to as the cradle of public health in the United States, going back 100, 150 years. And so we're lucky to have that foundation, but we obviously need much more as a nation and a state, and that needs to be addressed and taken care of. We need to protect our healthcare workers who are currently at risk in the workplace, taking care of people, not just in hospital-based settings, but in home and community-based settings, where a lot of care is occurring, making sure they've got the equipment they need to provide those treatments, to provide care and provide it safely to both patients and to themselves going forward. And then I'll just also say that one of the things that's going to be coming up in discussion, the next COVID-related bill coming out of Congress, is large amounts of money being available to states and cities for their general use to deal with the economic downturn that we're going into, and will likely be around for at least another year or two, according to a lot of the economic forecasting that's coming forward from reputable public policy think tanks. This is going to be a very serious economic downturn, likely greater than the Great Recession of a decade ago, perhaps as much, or in various ways, close to the Great Depression of 90 years ago. And it's going to be fairly long lasting for a year or two at least. That will put tremendous strain on state and local governments that we are already starting to see. We need federal support from that from the government to mitigate a lot of that, because otherwise the states and cities which are required to balance their budgets are going to slash and burn like we've seen nothing before. So that is really important that we get lots of money coming into New York, particularly because we have been the epicenter of the pandemic in the United States heretofore, far and away than any other place. And so far, the money that's been coming forth from the federal government to states and cities has been doled out, if I can be frank, politically, as opposed to where the need is. And so we need to make sure that that happens. And then lastly, I'll close up and talk about, we need to make sure that those that heretofore have been left behind in the previous COVID bills, and there have been 3 of them to date, that they are the ones addressed, who are bearing the brunt of the pandemic at this point. They primarily fall into 2 categories. One are very low income families that are not benefiting as much as more moderate income and middle income families are benefiting. So we really need to make sure that they are particularly addressed, because they're really at their wits' end at this point. And then lastly, in terms of benefit programs, all immigrants must be covered by the programs that are being created and extended with relation to the pandemic. We cannot get past this pandemic unless all immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, have relationship to any and all of these programs. We will not be able to go forward without that. I want to make that very clear. We have to be very forthright about that, because people are going to push back given the anti-immigrant animus and sentiment that's been out there. But we cannot get past the pandemic if we leave certain immigrants behind in addressing the pandemic. We must include all of them. And then lastly, in terms of the public programs that are being created to help people out, we need them to be in place much longer than currently is the case. They're slated to go away at this point once the Trump administration would announce that the pandemic public health crisis is over. We need them to last through the entire period of the economic downturn, which would be another year or 2 probably, so that we can support each other going forward. So with that said, I'll stop, and we can take some questions.
Thank you. Roxanne, I understand there's a question.
Yes, we actually have 2. The first one is Mark. Mark, first of all, thank you so much. I know that New York 11's focus is on the congressional leaders and the candidates. What can we do to get the New York Health Act to pass in the Senate? How can we get co-sponsors of the bill to become champions of the bill? So okay. I guess this question is asking about what we can do on the local level.
Yeah, so I didn't mention that, but thank you for bringing that up. The New York Health Act is a universal health care bill that is in the legislature. It has passed several years running in the Assembly, although not this year yet. We'll see if they come back to session or not, given the pandemic, and was not taken up last year. It has strong support in the Assembly in terms of co-sponsors and so forth. It's just a matter of making it a priority for the Speaker to schedule it for a vote in the Assembly. And the assumption is if it gets scheduled, it will probably pass by a comfortable margin again. The problem has been in the Senate with the shift in the balance of power that happened 2 years ago. In the Senate, we now have a much better landscape to try to move that bill forward in the Senate. They are very close, I think within 1 or 2 co-sponsors of having a majority of senators as co-sponsors on the bill. And if and when we cross that line, we'll be at a much better place politically to move forward. I think what it will mean is, in terms of anything happening with regard to that this session, is really when and whether the legislature comes back into session. They just finished up the state budget process, which turned out to be very kind of bizarre, and the outcome was not very good kind of across the board, particularly when it comes to healthcare. That's another conversation for another time. But at any rate, we're waiting to see if and when they come back, what will be on their short list of stuff that they're going to do, if this will be on it. I know that in terms of the Senate in the past, Senator Savino has been a co-sponsor. I don't believe she is yet a co-sponsor yet for the current session of the state Senate. So people may be wanting to talk to her about doing that. She will help us cross that psychological barrier of getting a majority of sponsors on that to move forward. So that's what I can say with regard to that.
Thank you. Clearly, we could talk about this for another hour. There's more questions, but we're going to have to move on. I'm hoping we could get some questions to you offline and see if we could respond.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. Fine.
Great. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Now I'd like to turn it over to Sam to talk about labor issues. Thank you.
Just make sure I'm not muted.
You're good, Sam.
Yeah, very good. All right, so I mean, I can speak for CWA Local Level 2 and CWA, and you know, just as Nidhi spoke to us earlier about Trump rollbacks in the environmental world, you know, to labor, the National Labor Relations Board is our EPA, so to speak. So we had the Janus decision that public sector workers, it was right to work in the public sector. And then, you know, the Trump board, you know, most times the board follows the president because he gets the majority of appointees. So it's always a turning of the dial, you know, more corporate friendly or more worker friendly. I mean, what the Trump administration done is like they turned the dial all the way that way and broke off the knob, like, so to speak. You know, things like anything Obama did that was positive, that gave workers more of a voice in the workplace. With his corporate board, they've just systematically dismantled it all. Obama had in place a 30-day rule. If you decide you want a union in your workplace and 50% plus one agrees, there's an election and that's it. You have a shop in 30 days. And the 30-day rule is helpful because the company didn't have a chance to get their anti-union machine involved. You know, things like organizing student teachers, folks that in the state, they work for SUNY, so to speak, but they're grad students who work, you know, they do some teaching. And, you know, their right to organize them during Obama got more opened up. And now, you know, that door's closed again. There was an email rule where if they send nonsense over company email systems, you're allowed to organize over company email systems. The Trump board has turned that around. The unit size. So if you organize a shop of 35 people in Staten Island, the board can turn around and tell you, well, that's fine, but the unit is the whole Northeast. So now you got to go get 50%. So that makes a big difference. The Obama administration opened up micro units. So if you had 7 people telecommuting from this location, you could just organize them. You know, even protections from being fired for union activity on company property have gone the opposite direction. The joint employer rule, like in a situation like McDonald's, the whole fight for 15, where since McDonald's set the salaries, the pay, the benefits and everything, they were considered the employer along with the franchisor. And that's what enabled that movement. That's been overturned. McDonald's is not responsible for its individual franchised stores as far as being an employer is concerned. You know, just limited to protect the concerted activity. There was a Walmart employee, a button, things that you're allowed to do in the workplace. Everything's just got kind of turned against us. So, I mean, we are in the stages of planning our political plan in light of COVID. You know, there's a call next week with the entire national union's political leaders. You know, there's going to be a heavy focus on the absentee ballots. You know, maybe there'll be less canvassing and more digital correspondence with our members. And we're really making it about, you know, it's not about parties. It's about who's, you know, for working families, you know, and the board is a big part of that, obviously. You know, we'll be sending volunteers to campaigns. We have made an early endorsement of Max Rose and AOC and a few folks in the Northeast. You know, and one of the standards the union has at the national level is any congressperson that wants our support needs to have supported the PRO Act, which our local congressman co-sponsored. I mean, this kind of seeks to undo what Trump has done and the latest board has done, you know, protect strikes and other activities and make it illegal for employers to permanently replace striking workers. The bill would eliminate obstacles for workers to get their first union contract. You know, and it's never going to get through the Senate, but it's a check on the Democrats to say who's for this. So if you weren't for the PRO Act, you're not getting CWA support. As far as COVID-19, you know, goes, I think it pushed to the forefront things we always, on some level, knew were just, you know, the issues that would make people's working lives better, you know. So we're supporting the Workers' Bill of Rights and any future relief bills that would require employers to provide free PPE, would require robust premium pay for people working through a pandemic, protect the collective bargaining agreements, because as these companies' revenues decline, a friendly government will let them back out of their union contracts, you know, in time of crisis. We need guaranteed paid sick leave and family leave. We need to protect whistleblowers from reporting safety concerns, you know, and guarantee no-cost healthcare, you know, using public programs. We need to fund childcare. And we need to hold the corporations accountable in any kind of future relief bill to say, you know, your ass is getting bailed out. We don't want to see giant CEO pay, stock buybacks, dividend increases. You know, you're going to use this money, you know, for the people that make you your money, you know. So like I said, this is kind of laid bare the problems we knew were already there, right? That sick leave and protective equipment and protected workers is vital, you know. But to us in this local, another thing I think laid bare to us that is that this public government partnership and or whatever you call it, the outsourcing of some of the stuff they do. And you know, example is Conduit. You know, I don't think everyone knows that when you go through Easy Pass and pay a toll, that's a private company collecting that money on behalf of the state. They have a contract. You know, they're doing a vital function in the state. They're the only one bringing revenue into the state right now. And when Cuomo sent his whole workforce to work from home, this private contractor, because, you know, the CDC stuff is just suggestions. They've been so slow to address these people's concerns at safety, even to you know, transition to work from home. We're dealing with almost a tale of two employers. And, you know, part of this campaign is going to be to expose the bad actors in this whole thing. You know, we have employees working at Verizon. We have employees working at the Easy Pass system, the Conduit company. And, you know, Verizon's negotiated with the union, provided leaves. If you're caring for someone with COVID, if you have COVID, if you have an underlying condition, if someone in a home has an underlying condition, Conduit is offered unpaid leaves. Work from home, to their credit, Verizon got done in about a week and a half. They got everyone that possibly could work from home, working from home. You know, Conduit is just initiating plans to work from home. You know, the social distancing, their answer was to cut people's hours so they were there less together. You know, so, I mean, the one bright spot in that is I'd like to shout out, there's a real group there that are taking ownership of their union and realizing their collective power, you know, and, you know, we're basically at a turning point in the labor movement that, you know, we don't know if we could survive another, as the labor movement as we know it may not survive another Trump administration. But, you know, as long as there's folks like that know their rights and stand up to their bosses, we'll build it up back, you know, stronger than before. But it's going to be an interesting election cycle. That's really all I have.
Sam, thank you so much. We do have a couple of questions. Let's see if, can you hear me, Sam?
Yes.
Great. Let's see if we could try to get through them before we run out of time. First one is, do you think, what's your projection on like unions getting stronger given what's been happening in places like Amazon, the Amazon warehouse on Staten Island? What's your outlook?
I think it's kind of like what I just restated. I know the movement going forward is going to have to be, you know, organic from the bottom, not driven by, and this is a personal opinion, not driven by, you know, giant bureaucratic unions. You know, as long as people are willing to stand up at some level and get themselves organized, there'll always be a movement, you know. You know, I don't know what it's going to look like, though. Who knows what it's going to look like?
And does the union have a position on how soon we should send workers back? It was interesting when you were talking about some of the corporate races to kind of set up work from home strategies for their employees. But in general, are you like a lot of the sort of more conservative approach to the economy, well, conservatives approach to the economy of get workers back as fast as possible? Or do you want to take a more measured approach to getting workers back in the workspace?
You know, it's good to think about. It's a tough one to answer because all people have all been deemed essential. So it's been and then we're embracing the fact that we're essential, you know, but we need every bit of safety and the ability to leave if you have an underlying condition and things like that, you know. But, you know, I think if it meant, you know, losing the sustainability of this union, just to putting people in danger I you know, I can't see anyone wanting to take that route, right? To rush back to you know, maintain the sustainability of the infrastructure. I mean, I think it's the people's safety first, and I would defer that to the scientists, not the politicians.
Yeah. I think we all agree that we need to give our essential workers in every sector the equipment and the means that they need to protect themselves. Okay, last question. If we get another Trump administration and something like this happens again, what protections do whistleblowers like me lose? This is an anonymous question.
You know, I don't know.
I don't know either. That's a tough one.
Yeah, I could make an assumption that whistleblowers had a better protections under Obama than Trump, and nothing for anyone seems to be getting better under Trump. I don't know. I can assume you'd have less protections as time went on. Who knows? You know?
Yeah. Yes. Sam, thank you so much. I think that's all that we have time for. I'm hoping we could ask you some questions offline.
Definitely.
Thank you, Sam. That was terrific. Thank you, Roxanne. But before I conclude, I would like to ask Tatiana Arguello to speak for a few minutes about the Summer Youth Employment Program, which the mayor has canceled on the basis of the pandemic. Tatiana, can you speak for a moment on that?
Sure, I'm just gonna start my video up.
Okay, thank you.
So, thank you to all the panelists and the commissioner, Nidhi, Mark, Sam, Roxanne, Barbara. I think this is so informative, and you know, obviously everyone who tuned in, you know, I think these are important conversations to have. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Tatiana Arguello. I'm on the board for PASI. I also am the director of workforce development at UAU. I just wanted to bring to you guys some breaking news that we've received on Friday. And, you know, pretty much what that news is that the mayor has unveiled his executive budget. And, you know, while we're seeing $7.4 billion in cuts, like these are definitely things that we have not seen in my lifetime or in any of our lifetimes, you know, but there are really such painful cuts that we're seeing in his proposal, you know, things like, you know, the overnight ferry or, you know, our pools and our beaches being closed down in the summer. More importantly, I think that there are cuts that are coming that really are just going to change the way that our nonprofits look going forward. You know, whether people are going to be able to maintain and stay afloat. You know, a lot of agencies have spent decades trying to build and respond to needs and serve communities. And there's such weak infrastructure where, you know, a summer or a few months of uncertainty could really force organizations to close down. You know, more specifically, you know, the cuts like the cornerstones or summer camp or community centers that are coming this summer is just unthinkable, because as we start to open up the economy, where are, you know, our essential workers, or where are our workers who are going back to work going to get needs like childcare, right? And so my focus and my plea here today is, you know, obviously the Summer Youth Employment Program, SYEP, but I did just want to mention these other programs that are getting cut as well, because I've never seen something like this. These cuts are unprecedented. And so SYEP serves over 75,000 families across New York City. This program has a decade-long history of uplifting impoverished youth. I myself was an SYEP participant. I worked at a nursing home, and it was a great experience for me. And, you know, not is it just an opportunity to get some experience in the summer, it's also, you know, an opportunity to put some money in your pocket. And, you know, while we're dealing with these, you know, things that are byproducts of COVID, you know, families are really suffering. And, you know, there are neighborhoods where, you know, you're not really able to get some of that stimulus packet, or you're not able to get some of the protections. And, you know, students and youth can really use a paycheck in the summer, you know, in addition to being some sort of busy. You know, I know I was telling my Peace Action family the other day that I had went to the park and I was overstimulated, and I'm a little fearful for what that means when the economy starts to open up, and when we start to be able to go back outside, right? And so, you know, we have to do something. We have to fight back. We have to, you know, protest these cuts. You know, there's over 75,000 families who use this as an economic lifeline, you know, whether that's, you know, getting some food on their table, or, you know, some clothes on youth's back. And, you know, so I just want to urge everyone to look into these cuts, but also to help advocate. You know, if we make some noise, I really do believe that we can make a difference, and that this is going to be a fight that is going to take a lot more of pot banging and really be something that is just a lot more thoughtful. We've never had to do something like this. I mean, every year we do a budget dance, but this year, a cut this severe, you know, over 70 providers were forced to lay off their entire staff with a day's notice. And, you know, providers who have been making preparations for virtual work experiences to provide safe and remote programming to comply with social distancing guidelines. And, you know, it's just unthinkable how, you know, we were forced to make major cuts to our programming, decades-long programming overnight. And also the fact that there are many fixed costs that are associated with these programs. You know, a lot of nonprofits don't know how they're going to pay their rent or their other fixed costs. And so my plea today is just, you know, for us to sign a petition. I'll put that in the chat. It's bit.ly / save SYEP. And just to share it around, you know, we really want to get letters out to our mayor, but also on the congressional level as well. And again, this is something that will affect all of New York City. You know, Staten Island in particular, there's over 6,000 youth that this is impacting, but citywide, there's 75,000 families. And so we want to, in 2019, what has happened was that the federal government actually helped subsidize programs like SYEP due to the economic crisis. And so we're looking for a similar response. And I think that the mayor is as well, you know, and I think he's trying to lay that groundwork. So again, we're just trying to make some noise, and I just wanted to inform everyone of these cuts in the executive budget, and that we as UAU and we as a collective are going to be fighting back. And we have some amazing allies, UNH, our Councilwoman Debbie Rose, and Jamani Williams, our public advocate, to name a few, Charles Fall. So we have seen them mobilizing, and we have seen them just advocating for the reinstatement in any form of this program. So again, anything that you can do to help us push this along, and to help protest these cuts would be very meaningful and much appreciated.
Tatiana, we have one question that I was hoping you could answer super quick. What is the relief that's being provided to those affected by SYEP being cut?
There is no, for the provider side or for the participant side?
It's hard to say from the question, but I would assume the participant side.
So there is no relief. They literally are cutting this program and cutting 75,000 wages that participants were going to be able to receive this summer. There's also no relief in providers as well. They literally cut 100% of budgets across the portfolio. And so providers were given a 1-day notice to literally shut down everything, which was then extended for 1 week. So we got to pay our employees a few extra days, but everyone's kind of out of luck, and we're not sure the next time we're going back to work. So that's very disheartening. It's just it's a disheartening situation to be in for our participants, for our youth, and for our providers, quite frankly. And so I really would like just for us to be able to circulate this petition and to write some letters to our electeds.
Thank you, Tatiana. I'm going to pass it back to Barbara. Thank you so much for making us all aware of the issue.
Thank you. Good luck. Anyway, I would like to just do 2 things before we end the forum. We have a slide that's going to come up in case any of you would like to get involved politically, but without getting face-to-face to anyone. If you're nervous about the pandemic, there is the Vote Forward information. You can write letters to registered Democrats who are low turnout voters through Vote Forward. So you could go on their website. The other thing, if you would like to donate to people in need on Staten Island, there are the 3 places that we're suggesting, but of course you can donate any place that you wish to. But I'm going to actually just be quiet for a moment so that if anybody wants to use the time to copy any information or take a snapshot of it, they can. And then we are going to actually put out a short poll of 4 questions. But we're going to give you, all right, the poll is up. So think about the places to donate, think about writing the letters, and please answer the questions on the poll. Let me add one thing that someone, yes, you do need a printer to print out the letters for Vote Forward. And then they're not to be mailed until October because these are registered voters. They just are not voters that usually vote. So they're not likely voters. They're just registered. So you don't have to get stamps right now, but in order to write the letters, you don't have to get envelopes either right now. But to write the letters, you do have to print them out. is the poll done?
It looks like it, Barbara. It looks like we have almost 100% completion. There's some people finishing out the last 2 questions. So we'll give them maybe 10, 15
Another
more
minute.
seconds.
Sure.
Okay.
Will you want to summarize the poll results?
Sure. Someone is letting me know, actually, we have a lot less than I thought. Let me just check on this real quick. We have 21 out of 36 attendees who have answered. So folks, if you don't mind, please fill out the poll. It's a very short poll. Hopefully you can access it. All right, we're moving up. 25 of 36 have answered now, Barbara.
Okay, I'm going to wait another minute. Then you'll summarize what you have, and then we'll be signing off.
You got it.
Okay, Roxanne, where?
All right, so I think we got good participation, Barbara. There's 6 people who called in who can't access the poll, but we did get 25 out of 36. For the first question, are you registered to vote? We have everyone on the call is registered to vote, which is great news. Are you planning to vote in the June 23rd primary election? We have 24 folks that said yes, and 1 person who said no. If you are voting in the 23rd primary, are you interested in voting by absentee ballot? And the majority at 20 folks said yes, 5 said no. The next question, should we plan more election 2020 forums? And it is 21 folks for yes, and 4 said maybe.
No one said no, though, right?
No one said no. I'll take that as a success.
Okay. Well, then I'm going to conclude by thanking everyone for joining and thanking all the speakers. Each one of you was just absolutely terrific and informative, and we really appreciate your joining us. So everyone, please stay healthy and safe, and we'll see you all soon. We're ending now. Bye-bye.